My husband Mark had gone off on a business trip, leaving me alone in our apartment, and honestly, it was a drag. At first, I relished the peace, the quiet evenings where I could unwind without any distractions. The first few days were fine. I caught up on my favorite shows and enjoyed the stillness of the apartment. I filled the time with long walks and books I'd meant to read. I even tried cooking new recipes, but after a while, that solitude turned from comforting to isolating. Days stretched on, and I found myself sitting on the couch, staring at the wall, feeling the emptiness of the place. The silence wrapped around me like a heavy blanket, making everything feel muted. I missed the little things, the sound of Mark's laughter, his silly jokes, even the way he'd steal the covers at night. I missed our shared moments, the everyday conversations that made life feel full. I tried to keep myself busy, but nothing seemed to fill the void. I kept glancing at the clock, counting the days until Mark would come home. I thought about inviting friends over, but the idea felt daunting. I didn't want to feel like I was putting on a show. My world felt small, and I was starting to feel the weight of that smallness pressing in on me. Then, just when I thought I'd lose my mind from boredom, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find my son, Liam, standing there with that familiar smile that always warmed my heart. He'd come home from college for a brief visit, and I felt a rush of relief wash over me. The moment he walked in, everything changed. It was like a breath of fresh air had blown into the room. Seeing him again after some time made my heart race. He looked so much older, more mature, and I couldn't help but notice how attractive he'd become. Gone was the little boy who used to follow me around the house. In his place stood a young man with an easy smile and an energy that filled the space. I felt a mix of pride and nostalgia, remembering how quickly he had grown up. "Hey, Mom," he said, stepping inside and throwing his bag down with a casual ease that made me chuckle. His voice was deeper, more assured, and it struck me just how much he had changed in such a short time. I was taken aback by how strong he seemed, both physically and emotionally. "Hey, kiddo," I replied, my voice tinged with excitement. "What a nice surprise. I wasn't expecting you until later." "Yeah, I figured I'd pop in for a bit. I missed home," he said, looking around the familiar space as if he were absorbing it all. It felt like a balm to my lonely heart to have him there, filling the air with his laughter and presence. In that moment, I realized just how much I had missed him. The weight of solitude began to lift, and the apartment felt alive again. We slipped into an easy rhythm as we started chatting about his classes and his friends. I couldn't help but feel a sense of joy bubbling up inside me. This was what I had been missing, a connection, a sense of family that had felt so distant during those long, lonely days. As Liam settled in, the familiar sound of his laughter filled the room, and I couldn't help but smile. It had been a while since we'd spent quality time together like this, and I was struck by how much he had changed. He walked in with an easy confidence that I hadn't noticed before. His once boyish face had sharpened, his jawline more defined, and his eyes held a depth that spoke of maturity and experience. I couldn't believe my baby boy was now a man, strong, serious, and surprisingly attractive. "Mom, you should have seen my dorm. The guys are wild," he said, flopping onto the couch beside me. I loved hearing him talk about his college life, about the friends he'd made and the challenges he faced. It made me feel connected to him in a way I hadn't anticipated. It was like I was getting a glimpse into his world, a world I knew I had to let him explore. But as he shared stories about late-night study sessions and spontaneous adventures, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something different about him today. The way he looked at me was more than just the adoration of a son. There was an intensity there, something that made my heart flutter just a bit too fast. I tried to brush it off, telling myself that he was just growing up, but the warmth in his gaze lingered like a secret. We reminisced about family vacations and silly childhood moments, the stories flowing easily between us. Each shared laugh felt like a thread weaving us closer, and I found myself leaning in, hanging on to every word he said. The air felt charged with a familiarity that was both comforting and unnerving. Liam leaned back, stretching his arms behind his head, and I caught a glimpse of the man he was becoming, confident and secure in his skin. I remembered how I used to tuck him in at night, his small frame curled up under the covers, and now here he was, a young man exuding a charisma that pulled me in. "Mom, do you ever miss those days?" he asked, breaking my train of thought. His voice was softer now, tinged with nostalgia. "I mean, just being together, no worries?" I nodded, feeling a wave of emotion wash over me. "I do. I miss our little moments. Life gets busy, doesn't it?" I replied, my voice slightly choked. He smiled, and for a brief moment, the room was filled with a silence that spoke volumes. The comfort of our bond wrapped around us, but beneath that, I could sense something brewing, an undercurrent of unspoken feelings that seemed to shimmer in the air between us. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once, and I didn't know how to address it. The dynamic was shifting, and as I looked at my son, I realized I was seeing him in a new light. It felt like I was standing on the edge of something profound, something that could change everything I thought I knew about our relationship. I could sense it, and deep down, I knew he felt it too. The connection between us was growing deeper, more complex, and in that moment, I couldn't help but wonder where it would lead us. As the board game spread out before us, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just another game night. The air felt different, electric, charged with an unspoken energy that made my skin prickle. I watched Liam as he set up the pieces, his movements confident and deliberate. He had changed so much over the years. What used to be a small boy, eager to play with his toys, had transformed into this tall, handsome young man sitting across from me. The way he laughed, the way he looked at me, there was an intensity that was impossible to ignore. We started playing, but every roll of the dice felt heavy with meaning. I could feel his eyes on me more than the board. The game faded into the background as the tension thickened between us. Each time I caught his gaze, a flutter of warmth spread through me. I could see the changes in him, not just physically, but in the way he carried himself, the maturity in his voice, the way he leaned in closer, as if the distance between us was something he wanted to bridge. I couldn't help but notice the way he leaned closer, his arm brushing against mine as we reached for the same piece. It sent a shiver down my spine, and for a moment I forgot about the game altogether. I was acutely aware of the warmth radiating from him, and my breath caught in my throat. I could feel my heart racing, pounding against my ribcage as if trying to break free. Was it just me? Or was there something simmering beneath the surface, something that had shifted in our dynamic? "Hey, you're not even paying attention, Vin," he teased, breaking the spell for a moment, his voice light but his eyes still holding that intensity. I laughed it off, but inside I felt a whirlwind of emotions. How could he look at me like that? It was a gaze filled with something more profound, a depth that made my pulse quicken. As the game progressed, I couldn't help but steal glances at him. He was so focused, his brow furrowed slightly as he calculated his next move. But every time he glanced my way, I saw it. The desire, the curiosity, the longing. It was like we were sharing a secret that only we could understand, a silent agreement that whatever was happening between us was more than just a mother and her son sharing a game. "Okay, your turn," I said, forcing a casualness into my voice. But as I pushed the dice toward him, our fingers brushed, and the contact sent a spark through me. I froze for a moment, the game forgotten. "Sorry," I muttered, pulling my hand back as if I'd been burned. But Liam just smiled, a knowing smile that made my heart race even faster. "Don't be sorry," he replied, his tone low and almost intimate. It was like he was inviting me into a space where only the two of us existed. I could see the warmth in his eyes, and I was hit by a wave of emotions that felt overwhelming. In that moment, the board game transformed into something far more significant, an arena where our unspoken feelings battled against the weight of societal norms and familial bonds. The tension was palpable, and I knew that this playful night had taken a turn into uncharted territory. I had to focus, had to regain control, but it was getting harder with each glance, each brush of skin. As we played on, the room seemed to shrink around us, the game a mere backdrop to the real game we were both now involved in, an exploration of boundaries, desires, and the complicated nature of love that twisted itself around us. The air was thick with an unsaid promise, and I felt torn between what I wanted and what I knew was right. As we stood out on the balcony, the stars twinkling above us like tiny beacons, I could feel the weight of Liam's gaze on me. The night was serene, almost surreal, but there was an undeniable tension in the air. I turned to face him, and the seriousness in his eyes made my heart race. It was as if the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. "Mom, I've been thinking a lot about us," he said, his voice steady yet filled with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. There was something different in the way he looked at me, something that made my heart flutter and my breath hitch in my throat. "I know this might sound strange," he continued, "but I feel something for you, something more than just a son for his mother." The words hung in the air, a confession that felt both beautiful and terrifying. I was stunned, unable to fully process what he was saying. My mind raced as I searched for a response, my heart pounding against my ribcage like a drum. I had always seen Liam as my little boy, but here he was, transformed into a young man standing before me, bearing his soul. "Liam," I started, my voice trembling slightly. I don't know what to say." I could feel a whirlwind of emotions swirling inside me, a mix of love, confusion, and an overwhelming urge to protect him. The intimacy of the moment enveloped us, and I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "You have to understand, this is all so unexpected. I never thought, I've always loved you, but this is different." He stepped closer, the space between us shrinking. I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, and it ignited a fire within me that I wasn't sure how to control. "I can't help how I feel," he said, his eyes searching mine for understanding, for acceptance. "Every time I'm with you, it feels like everything else fades away. It's just you and me, and it feels right." The sincerity in his words tugged at my heart. I wanted to reach out to comfort him, but I also felt a rush of fear. This wasn't just a fleeting crush, it was something deeper, something that threatened to upend the very foundation of our relationship. "Liam, this isn't how it's supposed to be," I whispered, the weight of my words heavy on my tongue. "You're my son. We can't cross that line." He took another step forward, his hand brushing against my arm, sending electric jolts through me. I fought to keep my composure, to maintain the distance that was necessary. "But it feels so right," he murmured, his voice thick with longing. "Can't you feel it too? The connection between us? I don't want to hide it anymore." I closed my eyes for a brief moment, trying to shut out the tempest of emotions swirling inside me. It was a battle between a mother's love and a woman's desire. "Liam, please," I pleaded, opening my eyes to meet his gaze. "I love you too much to risk everything. You mean the world to me, and I can't lose that." As the night wrapped around us like a shroud, I could see the turmoil in his expression, a mixture of hurt and yearning. I wanted to reach out and tell him that I understood, that I felt something profound too, but we were standing on a precipice that could lead to devastation. "We need to talk about this, but not now. We need to think about what this really means for us." The stars twinkled above, indifferent to the emotional storm brewing between us. I could see the realization dawn on his face, the acknowledgement that we were at a crossroads. "Okay," he said quietly, pulling his hand back as if I had burned him. "But it doesn't change how I feel." I nodded, feeling the weight of that truth settle heavily between us. It was a moment that could redefine everything we had known, and I had to tread carefully. The connection we shared was unlike anything I had ever experienced, yet it carried with it the potential for chaos. As we stood there, the night surrounding us, I knew we would need to navigate this with care and understanding. finding a way to preserve our bond while confronting the emotions that had come to light. Liam stepped closer, and I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, a heat that sent my heart racing. His hand found my shoulder, gently resting there, and for a moment the world around us faded away. All the concerns, all the worries about what was right or wrong seemed to evaporate in the space between us. I glanced up at him, my breath hitching as I took in the earnestness in his eyes. "Mom," he said softly, "I know this isn't what we're supposed to be feeling, but I can't ignore it anymore." His voice, filled with that mix of desperation and longing, made my heart ache. I felt something shift within me, a storm of emotions battling for dominance. I wanted to respond, to tell him I understood, but the words got tangled in my throat. Instead, I found myself instinctively taking a step back, breaking the delicate bubble we had created. "Liam, this is—" I began, but the weight of the moment stilled me. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not just my son, but a man who had captured my heart in ways I never imagined possible. "I just don't know how to feel about it," I finally managed, my voice barely a whisper. "You're my son. You've always been my baby." The words felt foreign as I said them, yet true in a way that made my heart ache. I could see the pain flicker across his face, and it broke me a little. "But you've grown up, and I've seen that," I continued, searching for some clarity in the swirling mess of my thoughts. "You're strong, Liam. You're becoming someone incredible." He looked at me, his eyes searching mine for understanding, and I felt the tension in the air, palpable and charged. "Mom, I can't help how I feel," he repeated, his voice filled with a quiet urgency. "I think about you all the time. It's like I'm drawn to you in a way that goes beyond what I've felt before." Each word hung heavy between us, thick with unspoken truths and desires. "Liam, I can feel it too," I admitted, my heart racing at the confession. "But we can't cross that line. I can't risk losing what we have." I looked down, trying to steady my thoughts as I replayed every moment we shared. How could this be happening? How could I feel this way about my own son? It was a question I was afraid to answer. "You're so important to me, and I don't want to mess that up," I added, my voice trembling with emotion. He stepped back, pain etched across his features, and I saw the struggle within him. "I don't want to lose you either," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But it feels so right when I'm with you." The honesty in his words was raw, and I felt a wave of longing crash over me. But I knew I had to be strong, had to protect us both from this fire that threatened to consume everything we held dear. Let's just take a step back," I suggested, my heart heavy. "We need to create some space for ourselves, for both of us to think." I knew I had to be firm, yet gentle, trying to navigate this uncharted territory without shattering everything we had built together. "We can focus on your studies and your future, Liam. We can reconnect as mother and son, but we need to find a way to move past these feelings." The words tasted bitter on my tongue, but I forced them out, hoping they would provide some clarity for both of us. Liam nodded slowly, the fight in his eyes dimming just a bit. "I get it," he said, though I could see the hurt still lingering there. "But it doesn't make it any easier." I reached out, brushing my fingers against his arm, trying to offer some comfort. "I know it doesn't, sweetheart. But this is what we need to do." And in that moment, I hoped we would both find our way through this tangled mess, holding on to the love that had always existed between us, even as we stepped back from the brink. The air around us felt thick, heavy with everything left unsaid. I could see the storm of emotions swirling in Liam's eyes, confusion, desire, and that glimmer of hope. It was like we were standing on the edge of a cliff, teetering dangerously close to a fall that could shatter everything we held dear. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart, and finally managed to speak, my voice barely above a whisper. "Liam, we can't act on this. I love you too much to risk losing you as my son." His expression shifted from hope to uncertainty, the light in his eyes dimming ever so slightly. "But Mom, it feels so real," he insisted, his voice trembling. I could hear the desperation in his tone, and it tugged at my heartstrings. I reached out, gently cupping his face in my hand, my thumb brushing against his cheek. "I know it feels real. It feels real to me too. But this isn't just a moment we can dive into without considering the consequences. We have to think about everything we stand to lose." Liam's gaze dropped to the ground, and I felt my chest tighten at the sight of his vulnerability. "What do you mean?" he asked, looking back up at me, hope still flickering in his eyes. I sighed, trying to find the right words, knowing I had to be firm yet compassionate. "If we cross this line, it changes our relationship forever. You're my son, and I can't bear the thought of losing that bond. We've built a beautiful life together, and I wouldn't want anything to jeopardize that." "But what if this is what we're meant to be?" he pressed, his voice earnest. "What if this is just the beginning?" I shook my head, feeling the weight of my decisions press down on me. "Liam, this feels intense, I get it. But we're both in uncharted territory. I need you to understand that I'll always be your mother first. We can't just forget those years of love and support that define us. We need to set boundaries." I watched him process my words, the realization settling in like a heavy fog. "So what do we do now?" he asked quietly, a mixture of resignation and frustration in his voice. I took a step back, needing space to think. "Let's take some time apart, just for a little while. Focus on your studies, your friends, the things that make you who you are outside of this situation. We can still talk, still share moments as mother and son, but we need to create some distance to figure out what this all means for us." Liam nodded slowly, the fire in his gaze dimming but not extinguished. "Okay, Mom," he replied, his voice softer now, resigned to the boundaries I was laying down. I wanted to reach out, to pull him close, but I knew that would only blur the lines further. "And remember, no matter what happens, I love you. That will never change. We'll find our way through this together, but we need to do it carefully." As I stepped away, I could feel the ache in my heart, the sadness of what we were putting on hold, mixed with the hope that one day we could reconnect without the weight of confusion hanging over us. The love between us would endure. I just had to believe that the boundaries I was setting now would lead us to a better understanding of ourselves and each other.